So an overview of what I just did there on the jazz standard is I used some of the ideas that we have in the solo that I gave you, but I embellished on some of it, which means that instead of playing the exact rhythmic figure that I had put in, I started off with the same shape, the F major for the D minor, and of course I'm always looking at that tritone for the dominant 7, but for the resolution we normally would go to here, to the E minor down here. I moved up to the E minor here, and that's something you can do. As I said, any of these tools that you have for these solos, if you have an E minor shape or a D minor shape, an F major, look for them in other parts of the neck and change the octave. And then of course I did a similar thing that I did in the blues solo. Because the tempo is slow, I used the triplet figure to make the rhythm a little bit broken up, so it's not continually just eighth notes. So some of the highlights of this solo is when I got to the B flat minor 7, in our solo we had this as the resolution, but what I did, I took this same line, which basically is based off of the B flat minor, but I did an altered dominant 7, and what that is just next to it is this diminished chord right here, which is a C sharp diminished, and that I went into the resolution of the A flat major 7, which again has that C minor on top of it. So I was going chromatically, and that's a very useful way to get the dominant 7 to not be just a straight dominant 7. And I used some rhythmic figures that broke things up too within that. But it's, again, having the tools that you have of all these different ideas that I've given you in the lesson, you can utilize them and you can move them around in the way that the inversions are. You can move them around in terms of the rhythmic figures, and ultimately they're going to become a part of your vocabulary. So when I got to the A flat minor 7, I used again the same type of idea on the B flat minor 7, but what I did is I walked up to this higher octave, and walking up for me means that when you go up the string on one string, you're following what you're hearing to get to your target note. So it might take you a little bit of time. It's chromatically the way that I walked up, but if you start to do things like that, it gets you away from being in a position and it allows you to utilize the whole neck, and that's really what we want to be able to do, because when I'm soloing, I'm gesturing, which means I'm just letting things flow. I'm not worried about where I'm playing. I don't think too much about anything other than just trying to make the notes fly. So that's a good example of just letting the hand just move up to that note, that higher octave, because I started down here and ended up here, but there's a continuity in how the line develops to get to that note. So the next part of the solo, there's a section where I'm playing this kind of a line, which is definitely directly coming from the triplet. And again, at a slower swing tempo, if you focus on that, it's going to help your time and your feel get a lot better. And then I went into a double time figure, but went back into that halftime feel. So playing with the feel is very important as well, and this is something you can practice, and especially this tempo, because it's very, very difficult to play very accurately at this tempo, and the window of where your time and feel should be will be delegated by the triplets. So there's a strong triplet feel on that ride cymbal, so be sure to listen to that and how I work against it. Sometimes I'll pull back, sometimes I'll push a little bit, but I always fall back to where the time is. So when I push a little bit on that double time figure, I'm going to pull it back when I get back to the triplet feel. Okay, to cap it off here, the last chord of the last 2-5-1 is actually going from E minor 7 to A7 to D major 7, and I used for the D major 7 a line like this, which actually is just a dispersed pentatonic. But what's important to see is that there is an A major in that. Now you'd ask yourself, why is A major in it? Well, it's a very simple answer, because if I play this chord, which we have as our chord D major 7, there's actually a minor triad in here, which is an F sharp minor. But if I lower this note here, now I have what we call a D major 9, and there's an A major in there. So that A major sound is what what I'm accenting on, and I'm trying to get that to come across. So sometimes utilizing those sounds, the extensions of the major 7s, like the major 9 or major 13, add a little extra something to it. And it's also based on a pentatonic, because there isn't anything other than that chord shape, and the line coming out of it is just a pentatonic here, which would come from A major. So if you utilize all those things that I gave you earlier and you kind of compare to what I did, you'll see a similarity. Again, you'll see a thread of how things were developed and how I tried to keep the continuity, so that when I ended the solo, of course I could have gone on and done more, but I tried to give a phrase that said, I'm finished, this is my solo. Because if you're playing one chorus or you're playing 15 choruses, you have to really decide as to when you let your dynamics go and when you decide to say, this is the final chorus for me. But again, the idea could keep going, but I at some point have to make the decision, okay, this is enough. So when you do your solos, try to think of in blocks. If you do 2 choruses, or you do 4 choruses, or you do 8 choruses, be prepared that if you do longer choruses, that you know you have to get to your high point somewhere later on, as opposed to if you only do 1 chorus, you've got to kind of get the high point earlier on.